Hey, we want to show you how we braid the mane. A couple things to point out in braiding the manes. We like to do them in smaller sections, maybe 2-3 inch sections. Reason for that, if you were to do much larger sections, say for instance like this, and you have that braided, I'm not going to braid it all the way down, but I'll show you just a little bit. If you were to braid that large of a section, when that horse extends her head down to eat, that neck stretches. And the bigger those sections are that are tied into one braid, the more pull you're going to get on that horse's mane, causing irritation, which can result in rubbing. So, we like to use 2-3 inch sections. It makes for more braiding, but in the long run it'll pay off. The second point I want to make is when starting these braids, we'll go ahead and start this section here. One thing you want to stay away from is making these first crosses, similar to the tail, is making these first crosses real tight. Putting a lot of tension on the neck and a lot of tension on the roots of this hair. You can see how tight that is. All that's doing is pulling on that hair. Imagine having a constant tug on your hair. It would get irritating, and you'd rub, you'd hit it, you'd do what you could to get rid of that irritation. Don't cause any irritation by braiding too tightly. So what we like to do, obviously that braid has to stay in, so there has to be a level of tension there, but it's a really, really low level of tension, okay? Start those first few crosses fairly loose. You can see here, that's a loose braid, but it's gonna stay in, and the way to keep that braid in is after the first 4 or 5 crosses, start tightening it up. Again, we don't make them real tight. We just make them snug enough to where they're not sloppy, they're not going to get loose and fall out. And then we go ahead and braid that all the way down. Now when you get down towards the ends, it does get a little tedious, and they're smaller braids, and it seems like, man, this is pointless to be taking this all the way to the end. Well, I would much rather have these hairs together in a braid than just loose on their own, subject to damage and breaking. So I won't go clear to the very ends. I'll go down somewhere around there. That much hanging out in a braid doesn't bother me. And then we like to finish them just using your standard black electric tape. Why? The reason we like using black electric tape versus, say, little rubber bands, the little rubber bands that you see, well, that are really made for holding braids in and for manes and tails, if you leave those in for a long amount of time, they tend to cut through the hair and break. In order to keep those rubber bands in, you gotta tie them tight in there. And by doing so, if you leave them in for a long period of time, those tend to cut through the hair strands. And the last thing you wanna do is have 4 or 5 inches of mane hanging out and a braid and a rubber band right here cutting through there, cutting those hairs out. So we like black electric tape. With this black electrical tape, do a couple wraps. This is what I like about black electric tape. Once you get it started, you can get a pretty good stretch on it to where it's going to stay in real good. Finish off. That's not coming out. Now people say or think, well, it's tape, you've got an adhesive on there. What happens if I leave it in a long time? When I take that off, you're gonna have that gunk and that adhesive. The thing we like about black electrical tape is you typically don't have that like you would with like a Scotch tape or a duct tape. Definitely don't be using tapes that have a really heavy, thick gummed adhesive to them. Again, that's why we like the black electrical tape. Now, if you were to leave this in during the summer, during the hot months for long periods of time, yeah, that's gonna cause that adhesive to melt and it's gonna gunk up that hair, which we don't want. Like the tails, we like to leave these braids in 7 to 10 days. If they look all right, there's no damage, there's no breakage, you can go a little longer, but typically a good rule of thumb is 7 to 10 days. Now, a horse with a mane this long, one thing we like to do is keep these braids up out of the way. She's gonna stick her head in a feeder. These braids, when her head goes down, are gonna come forward with her head, subject to snagging and catching on fences, feeders, water buckets. And so one thing we do to keep these up out of the way is take that strand, almost similar to how you would put a tail bag on. Separate that braid into 2 sections, run that braid through it once. I like to have about a 6-inch length. Bring it down if it needs to go up again. I don't like all that hanging down, so I'll go through another time. And get it to where the end of that braid meets up with the end of the hairs. Like that. And that's gonna vary between 4 to 7, 4 to 8 inches really. And what that's gonna do is keep that up out of the way. And then to finish that off, we just use our black tape. Now a point to make, and I just did it, don't pull down on this when you're tying this tape. You don't want tension pulling on the roots of that hair. Make sure you got some slack in it. Again, that's why we like the black electrical tape for this reason. You can pull it, put a stretch on it, wrap it around. You can stretch it and make it tight around that hair without feeling like you're cutting into those hair strands. And that's how I'll leave her mane. If you wanted, you could put a strand of tape up high and then down low. That's sufficient for this mare. We're gonna finish up the mane. So we've got her mane all braided. You'll notice this back section right here, right at the top of her withers. I don't like to braid that section, and the reason being is just for that. When she lowers her head, you can see there's a lot of stretch on this section of the neck, right here at the withers. If you were to have this braided, even if you do loose braids, when she extends that head down, you're gonna have a lot of tension there. Don't wanna give her any reason to rub. A lot of times when you're riding them, this section's covered up by a saddle pad or a blanket anyways, but you don't want to give her a reason to rub regardless. In trying to rub this section, she might end up getting a hold of this. So that's why we don't braid that section. Leave that be. So now that we've got it all braided, we're gonna go through all of these braids and tie them up like this first, and she'll be done for the day.